Welcome to the Enlighten Up podcast, where I am going to take you into a deep exploration of what it means to exist in this current reality. We are going to raise your vibes, open your mind, expand your heart, and dive deep into the wondrous mysteries and possibilities of this lifetime. There's been a spiritual catalyst that has set in motion the awakening process of many across the globe to return to the knowingness of self and unite what has been separated. Together, we're going to bring light into that darkness. We're going to remember the joy of living. But most of all, we're going to turn up the volume of our own eternal power and do the thing we're here to do. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Enlighten Up podcast. I'm so happy to be back here with you again, and I'm going to be introducing you to a brand new guest on the show. Her name is Dr. Tracy Kemble, and she is the author of The Narcissistic. She is a thought leader, entrepreneur, and women's empowerment expert with over 30 years of experience in teaching life transformation. She has created many programs of empowerment, but her most important work is the cornerstone project, Reclaiming Me, which is the journey from narcissistic abuse trauma to self-love. And we're going to talk all about narcissism. We're going to talk all about self-love today. And, Tracy, thank you, first of all, for being here. It's so wonderful to have you on the show. This is a hot topic. One of the things I really wanted to jump straight in with you is, narcissism it's a problem. It can cause a lot of trauma, which you're going to go into and share with us because you've had quite the journey with it. But one of the things that I do notice is that it might be used very flippantly to describe someone that you're not really, liking, or you think they're just being a little too self-absorbed, or, talk to me about this, because I think it's important for people to understand there is true narcissism, and then there's people who exhibit narcissistic qualities or behaviors, but they're not necessarily a narcissist.
Exactly. This term narcissism is tossed around more than sugar.
Yes.
People are just, if somebody has a bad day, they're a narcissist. If people aren't getting their way with somebody, they're a narcissist. If somebody is executing under pressure and, just has a ton of responsibilities and doesn't respond overly properly, or how somebody thinks that they need to in a kumbaya moment, they're a narcissist. And okay, let me just explain the condition.
Yes.
So, narcissism is not like being pregnant. You either are or you're not. We're talking about something that is a spectrum disorder, which means it goes from here to here. Each and every one of us is on the scale somewhere. Okay. Let me just say that none of us are exempt, especially in this society that we live in. But we all need to have something that is called healthy narcissism. And healthy narcissism is right here. And what healthy narcissism does, it allows us to keep the good in and push the bad out. Hey, not with me, not today, right? We all need that in order to have a sense of healthy self-preservation. As narcissism goes on up the scale, it then merges into what's called narcissistic characteristics. And these are just very difficult people. These are people that you just feel like you're in a constant arm wrestle with.
Okay.
And then as it continues to go on up the scale, it then goes into narcissistic personality disorder. Now you're talking about a very problematic person. And then as it continues to go on up the scale, you're then talking about an antisocial personality disorder, which is sociopath and psychopath. And these are the type of people that we just completely want to stay away from, because they are dangerous, dangerous people. Mm-hmm. Now, at the opposite end of narcissism over here, because it's a spectrum disorder, is something called self-love deficiency disorder. And these people are the polar opposite of these people, and that's why you see the kind, the gentle getting together with those that destroy. So when somebody is going along and under a lot of pressure and behaving and just having an off moment, that doesn't make them a narcissist. They may have responded like with a narcissistic with a narcissistic type of response, which is just a very selfish, insensitive response. That doesn't make them a narcissist, though.
Okay. Yeah, because let me ask you this. Is it possible if you've spent a lot of time living with a narcissist, like, and I mean like years and years, maybe even decades, can you become a narcissist, or is it like, how does it work?
So let's start from the beginning. All right.
Okay.
So in the beginning, there is this beautiful baby that arrives to this earth. It is a blank canvas.
Mm-hmm.
Babies are not born as narcissists.
Yeah.
Babies are raised into environments that are based in trauma, and they probably have a narcissistic parent, and one of three things happen. They become the golden child, which means that they'll probably grow up to be a narcissist. They become the scapegoat child, which means that everything gets blamed on them. They will end up in normally some sort of a chemical addiction of some sort, very self-sabotaging, or they'll become the invisible child, which is somebody who goes along to get along, doesn't have a voice, becomes a self-deprecate, tries to fly under the radar, misses out their potential in life. So the side effects of being raised in a narcissistic family are one of those three boxes. And the goal is, if you've been raised in it, that you'll end up reaching a point of discomfort that you'll go in for therapy. So a common question that I get, so that answers the question, are we born this way? No, we are created, people are created into narcissists or into those who accept narcissism. As far as, and I always love this question, as far as people saying, oh my gosh, I work with tens of thousands of women all over the world, and inevitably every single one will eventually come to the table and ask me or ask our facilitators, I think I'm a narcissist.
Yeah. Yeah.
I did it myself,
Yeah.
and the thing is the first thing is, if you're saying, oh my gosh, I think I'm a narcissist, you're not a narcissist, because a narcissist would never ask themselves, I think I'm a narcissist, or they would be proud of it. I'm a
Yes.
narcissist, get over it. But they're never going to have that introspective insight on themselves. Those of us who have survived narcissism have been taught naughty behavior by the best. So can we have we learned to survive, and have we seen areas that a person can bite at you, and you now understand what it looks like to bite back? Yes. So can we become the narcissist? We can start to resemble it, but the pendulum in recovery swings, goes like this. And as long as, if you're swinging over here and you're aware of like, oh, I don't like this, and you swing back, you're okay on your recovery journey.
Okay. Okay. I mean, there's so many questions I have for you. Is there, before, because I really want to get into your journey, I want people to hear your story because it's wild. Are there certain tendencies or environments that we have today that perhaps we didn't have, say, 20, 30 years ago? Like, for instance, social media and other phones and all that, that can feed narcissistic behaviors, not necessarily the actual.
We have a generation that has this desire, this unhealthy need to be seen,
Mm-hmm.
to be seen by themselves and to be seen by other people. And so we're being taken out of normal, healthy environments where we have that natural give and take within a family unit, within the playground unit, within the school unit, that we learn we're visible. We kind of learn how to adjust and go on in life. Well, there are so many people that they're growing up behind a screen, that they have this need to constantly look at themselves, that and a lot of times it's a distorted image of self that you're
Yeah,
looking at
it
with all
usually almost always is. Yeah.
yeah, with all the filters and everything of that nature. And so we are, people, we survived the pandemic, we survived COVID, And I like to say, people, we're in the middle of a narcissistic pandemic right now, that it is so out of control in our society. And I think that it's only going to escalate. And that's, one of the reasons I'm getting ready to run a workshop. Most people think that narcissism is with the person that you love or perhaps a parent, but it's all around us. It can be found in our bosses and in our coworkers and in teachers and in friends, not just a love relationship. And and it's all around us. So we need to be educated on it, because this personality trait is growing and growing.
Yeah, it really is. And it also enhances one of the things that I've noticed is the ease of love bombing
Mm.
when we have like, because you can love bomb someone on social media. You can go and you can say all these things, and then maybe in person there might be a thing and a disagreement or something, and it just it completely alters and shifts how that person behaves with you in that moment, that is completely different from the online version. So it's almost like you can get used to this idea of love bombing, and then all of a sudden it's not it. And when I say that, I'm just referring to this act of love bombing in specific, like in general, not like as a whole with narcissism. But I find that interesting because people are like so easy to say, "Oh my God, I love you. Oh my God, you're the best." And just completely inflate, and then do something completely traumatic to pop that bubble in an instant.
Yeah, well, I have a couple of thoughts on that. The first thing is, I was just talking in my last interview that people don't realize how love bombing can create trauma wounds. And love bombing is a very dangerous thing. And what love bombing is, for people who are listening in, love bombing is when somebody literally bombs you with love. And that means that right away, they don't go from like, oh, hi, nice to meet you. They're like, oh my God, I love you so much, and you're so amazing. And they put you up on this pedestal. And if you don't have a balanced ego, it's easy to jump up there and say, oh my gosh, the reason that I got so drawn into narcissism was because of love bombing, because of my early childhood wounds. I had abandonment trauma, I had abandonment issues, and I had a message in my soul that said, you're not lovable. And so when this person comes in and they're just enamored with me,
Mm.
it's like it just feeds that brokenness in me. And what it is it's a fish hook to get that person is trying to control you. I always say that I'm in the public eye, and I run 3 companies around the world, and I'm in a lot of media, and I speak and blah 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 blah. And whenever I meet somebody who is overly impressed with me from the start, I make a
Red
point
flag.
back, yeah, back up, because they're trying to put me up on that pedestal. And I know that eventually that I'm going to do something that's going to let them down, and they're going to turn around and go from love bombing me to hate bombing me. And that's a very narcissistic, destructive cycle.
Yeah, I agree with you. I have the same response to people when it seems to be like the compliments and the adoration just is so over the top for a very brief encounter of getting to know someone. To me, that's a total red flag. And it actually makes me feel really uncomfortable
Yeah, and
because
good. So that means that you're not operating in narcissism, or a wounded empath. You're not setting yourself up to be a target.
okay, good, 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 good. I'm not a target for all you narcissists out there watching. Well, let's get into your story because you've had quite the journey. I mean, we're talking about sexual affairs, Irish mafia, guns, knives, fires, jail, in law abuse. Like, what happened here? Because, yeah, for anyone who's listening right now, you want to stick around and listen to this journey because you've been through the ringer.
Well, you know what? When you experience trauma as a child and you're missing some of your core sense of self, you make choices that reinforce those negative messages inside of you. And when you ask, when you play that back to me, I'm like, oh my God, that's so not who I am. That was Tracy 2.1, and I'm now like Tracy
Yeah.
95.95. Just like the phones, right? I've upgraded. But what happened is, and it happens a lot to trauma victims, is the way that I ended up in highly dysfunctional toxic relationships, specifically zeroing in on narcissism, is because I was raised in an environment where there was narcissism. And so the personality traits of a narcissist I thought were completely normal. Not that I enjoyed them, not that they didn't hurt, but to me, I thought that this is how human beings operated. So for me to recognize that there was a big problem, the heat had to get unbearable. And so what happened is I went from a family that narcissism was our base, and I met and married somebody without the right reasonings. And this person was a mean narcissist, a rageaholic with a crazy narcissistic father. I mean, now that when I look back, I can put labels on things, but at the time it wasn't. I wrote all about that in my book, The Courage to Say No More. And it was 5 years of a relationship that nearly psychologically killed me. I ended up leaving that relationship and having to go into hiding because he was threatening to kill me and threatening to kill my family and whatnot. So I know that that's really dramatic. And the point that I want to make is I went into recovery for classic abuse recovery after that relationship. And I really thought, hey, I've got this, I'm under control and I'm grounded now, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this was way before narcissism or narcissistic abuse trauma or narcissistic abuse had a name. And so what happened to me is, though I got away from all that toxicity, because the narcissistic personality was a baseline for me, I found myself later on in life being surrounded again by people who are not threatening to kill me and kill my family, but where I was still feeling crazy and out of control of my life and things of that nature. Come to find out that I had once again gravitated towards normal, which is being around that narcissistic personality, that somebody is using you not for love but for a fuel source, and the
Oh,
devastating
that is
effects.
so the thing. That is what I've recognized with people, even if it's just narcissistic behaviors, is like they're wanting to feed off of your energy.
Exactly. So let me
Mhm.
explain why that is. So a narcissist is like a cell phone battery, in that as it goes along and it's being used up, the narcissist, though they may come across arrogant, they're super fragile. They have super fragile egos, and it's all a false front. And so they present this the difference between a healthy person and a narcissist is that a healthy person believes in self-love, and a narcissist is a self-lover. And so they're very tuned into themselves and only their needs, et cetera, et cetera. So, but what happens is that as they are like a cell phone battery, that when they begin to dip, they start to feel invisible. And so they search out, and it's a term called a target. They will search out targets, certain personalities that they understand, if I can lure this person in, they will become my constant fuel source. And so this is somebody who comes from a trauma background, somebody who's very compassionate, more of an empath. I call them wounded empaths. And they zero in, they get a hold of that person, and the first thing they do is they love bomb and put them on a pedestal and shower them with fake futuring and all these different things so that they can get them hooked. And then it goes from the dream girl, dream boy stage in the narcissistic cycle and merges over into the degradation stage. And that's when the person goes from loving you to suddenly hating you. And they get high not on seeing you happy, they get high on seeing you broken. And that's where the cycle can start to take on a life of its own, and trauma wounds really happen.
Oh, and that's scary. That's a really scary place to be. Like it's incredible because as the person who is um on the receiving end of the love bombing and is not the narcissist, you do also get filled up by their love bombing, right? You get filled up. And so once that gets taken away, all of a sudden it triggers your own wounding to like, oh, how do I get that back? Or how
And that's
it's,
exactly how the cycle begins, is that
yeah,
you start running after that person, trying to get back that person who
loved
committed
you.
to you.
Yeah.
That's what they came and that's what they presented. And you're
Gave
like,
you
but
all the
wait a minute.
validation.
Yeah, this is how we began. Why can't we get back to that? Well, that's not sustainable for them. That's not who they are. They're duping you to get you addicted to them. And then they pull it, and then you keep fighting to get that original version back. They keep chipping away at your self-worth, so suddenly you find yourself afraid to leave. It's painful to stay, but they've convinced you that you're either going to die if they leave you or nobody else will love you. I mean, it's just a whole degradation of the person, and the end goal is to get you addicted so that they can continue to fuel source off of you.
What was your greatest fear? Like at the height of it all, what was your biggest fear?
Oh my gosh. Well, narcissistic abuse trauma is based in fear. And so I think I had many, many fears. By the time I came out of it, I had, and I'm going to preface this very carefully, and I don't want this to cause the listeners any sort of shame because it's taken me lots of my journey of healing to get this. I allowed myself to be taken to a place where my narcissist had convinced me that basically if I left, the world would crack open and swallow me alive. Like I just didn't have the tools for self-sufficiency in our normal everyday cycle, that I would fail, that I wouldn't financially be able to take care of myself, that because love bombing and charm was such a big part of it, that nobody will treat me that way ever again. And so I think that fear of not being able to get through, to stand on my own in life, which was the opposite of what I came from, that was a big fear. And then I think, but what was the really big fear, to be quite honest with you, is having those moments when I was able to step back from myself and I saw myself degrading. I saw myself not wanting to live. I saw myself deteriorating in front of my own eyes. And that frightened me the most, as to how is this happening? Why can't I get a grip on this? And that, I think, I have a saying in recovery, is never lose respect for your healing. And I take pause in my life and always remember that moment, that I exposed myself to an environment that made me reach a point that I thought I wanted to die. That's dangerous stuff.
Mm-hmm. So not only did he reduce you to incapable of the basic functions of this world, but also that there was no reason for you to be alive.
There's no reason. There's no reason, because in the narcissistic relationship, one of the ways that they keep you trapped is to make you believe that everything is your fault. The way that I describe it is, if the sun doesn't come up, somehow it's my fault, and somehow I'm going to get in trouble or punished. There's going to be some sort of a punishment, a withdrawal of love, a withdrawal of communication, the silent treatment, rage. I mean, and you never knew which one was coming. But that's also the goal of the narcissist, is to keep their target in a constant state of check. It's in the book, it's called the chess syndrome, that you're constantly in this fight or flight mode, and they get fueled off of it. They get fueled off of seeing you in panic.
Okay, yeah. It's definitely beyond frightening to be in that place where you're literally going crazy
Yeah.
because someone's convincing you that you are.
And I'll tell you that the scary part about it is, in my instance, the the selfish behavior and having to be invisible out of survival came about because I was raised with narcissism in my familial circle. There are also, though, and I'll just use a male, female, not male and females. If you come from a good family, and I'm not talking about a family that inbred self-worth in you and things of that nature, just a good family. You just come from a good family that you were never exposed to abuse. You have no idea. There's an innocence about you. Let's say it might not be a trauma wound, but it might just be an innocence about you, especially if you have an empathic nature, that you have no idea if that person is on up the spectrum, how manipulative people can be. And so many times people say, how did that girl get into that? And what's going on there? And,
Mm.
what type of family did she come from? It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad family environment. It could simply be that you've been in a protective family environment and you have no knowledge that there are people out there who will emotionally eat you for survival.
So naivety is kind of your Achilles heel in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
What was one of the manipulative ways that he kind of hooked you in, and next thing you know, you're like, oh my God, like it's just an insurmountable like mountain to climb to get out of, or hole, I should say, that you're in. Like, how did he trap you?
Well, in narcissistic relationships, it's never just one big doozy. They
Mm-hmm.
don't come up and, punch you in the face and then you go, oh, gee, I think I'll stay around for that for
Yeah.
more. It's something that's called conditioning, and it's in the
Mm-hmm.
it's in the Narcissistic book as well. It's called narcissistic conditioning, and what they're doing is they're slowly trying to break you down so that they can gain control over you. It's no different than what happens in a cult onboarding, in that they get somebody, they study them, they say, where's that person's weaknesses? Now I know, and now they just manipulate and manipulate and manipulate. And keep in mind, this is somebody who love bombed you, and so they have convinced you that there is nobody else in the world that they love more or that loves you more. And so you're kind of high on this euphoric thing, and then it begins. And one of the most common things, like for example, that they compliment you, oh, you're so beautiful, you're so beautiful, you're so beautiful, and everything is great about you. And then one day you come out and you're all dressed up to go to dinner, and they'll be like, are you going to wear that?
Mm.
What? Am I going to wear what? Sure, you want to wear that? Why? I don't know. And then nothing else,
Yeah.
right? But what they've done is they planted that little seed of rejection or question, like, what am I not seeing, right? And then all night long, you're like, God, do I look awful? And so that's how it happens. It's like a drip feed that they slowly, what I'm reminded of right now is I was watching some Dateline show the other day, and it was about a man who his wife, which she has to be a sociopath, wanted to kill him, and so she was slowly drip feeding him uh like toilet cleaner or something like that in his coffee every day. And he didn't get sick right away. It took months and months and months and months and months for him to finally show symptoms. And then finally, when he got really sick, then he went to the hospital and they were able to understand what was happening. Well, the same thing is true with narcissistic abuse. It's just the drip feed that one day you wake up and you're like, something is really, really wrong. And the one thing that I share with all the women who come through my program is, by the time I went in for help, I walked into the therapy office and the therapist did what therapists do. And they said, why are you here? And the only thing I could say is, because my brain is made of mush and I feel invisible. And that was just, years of just the drip feed, the drip feed, the drip feed. Have I ever been hit, punched, shoved? Never, never.
The environment that you were living in was, I guess you said, had similarities to what you grew up in.
It's familiar.
Yeah. And this is one of the things, like I've done quite a few reels and Instagram, like TikToks and stuff on this when it comes to like dating, that what you really want to do when you're looking for someone who could be really good for you is to start dating the unfamiliar. Because oftentimes we equate familiar with safety, but so many of us have a very distorted idea, concept of what safety actually means for us. It's a distorted anchor of safety. And so how did you start to shift, moving away from that sense of what you started pulling in, those familiar kind of energies that would be in some way, not that they would make you feel at home, but they kind of do in a way, in a weird way, in a really backwards kind of sneaky back, coming in the back door kind of way. How did you start to shift your relationships with people in your life? Whether it was a partner, friendship, family, business, like whatever it was, so that you started forming unfamiliar relationships as opposed to the ones that you've been so familiar with?
It's a really good question. So I'll answer it two ways. The first way that I'll answer it is at the height of my unawakening, let's say, that I like to give the word picture that I was like a person who had my hand on a flame top or an electric stove, and my hand would be sizzling, and people would walk by and they'd say, "Oh my God, doesn't that hurt?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." And they say, "Don't you want your hand off?" And my response would be, "Can I?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I was so trained
Conditioned.
and conditioned to think that this was normal behavior, this was normal love. One of the dynamics of narcissistic abuse is to alienate you from outside information. And so, to answer your question, there was one day, I remember it very clearly, that I'm a college graduate, et cetera, that I realized, oh my gosh, I have not read a book in years. I had reached a point that every day was about calming the narcissist, was about avoiding fights, was about living up to expectations, just running, living this in this survival mode. The other shoe's going to drop, et cetera, et cetera. And what I realized is there's no new information coming in. And so I went to the bookstore and I bought a book on motivation, but I remember sitting down and my soul just drinking in this new information. And the way that I began to shift and change is to get new information into my mind and to get new information into my soul. And one motivation book, because I believe everything, if the student is ready, the teacher will present itself as a hermetic tradition. And that unfolded in my life is that a motivational book ended up leading to a book on abuse recovery, led to this one, led to that one, led to that one. And to the point that it took a long time, because at the time narcissistic abuse wasn't in daily conversation, that I was finally able to put word to what I was going to, which is the motivation of Narctionary, is to give name to the many ghosts that haunt you and keep you stuck.
So let's talk about the Narctionary, because I love the name. I love the
Thank
name.
you.
Having those terms is important to the healing process.
So much.
Because it allows you to create almost like identities that are tangible for you to understand, and it's not all up here in your head, like
with the word salad. and the
Yeah, the word
gaslighting.
salad. Yeah, yeah. And so having that tangibility, how has the narc, first, before we get into some of the terms, how has the narctionary helped others heal and perhaps leave relationships where they were in experiencing narcissistic abuse?
Well, I'll share the story as to how I wrote the book, and I think that answers the question. So what happened was, 30 years I'm in the recovery industry, specializing in narcissistic abuse is one of my specialties, and I have, believe it or not, a really good friend of mine who I knew she was with a narcissist, and one day he discards her, and she's out like a piece of trash, and she's on the floor and she's devastated, and she calls me and she's like, I don't even know what I'm going through. I've just heard your lectures in the past, and she's like, and I think I'm in a narcissistic relationship, but I think what just happened, and blah, blah, blah. And I listened to her and I said, well, you just got the discard. She goes, the what? I said, the discard. It's the third phase of the narcissistic abuse cycle, where the narcissist will throw you out like a piece of trash and move on with their life. She's like, oh my gosh. And then she began to talk about something else. And she said, and every time we talk, it's like everything just gets so jumbled, and there's never any, and I said, there's never any resolution. She's like, resolution? I'm like, yeah, resolution is what every healthy argument needs to end with. She's like, oh yeah. But I'm just left with so much confusion in my head. And I said, that's because you've been word saladed. And they, what do you mean I've been word salad? I said, word salad is when the narcissist uses a whole bunch of words just to confuse you and to get off topic. And so we had this continued, but he apologized, and it didn't make me do any good. That's because you got a faux apology. What's a faux apology? So this is how it began. And she said to me, Tracy, you should write a book with all these terms in it, so we newbies can, even when we go into recovery, there's so much to learn that it would be nice just to have just a dabble of it at your fingerprints. And literally along my recovery journey, I kept a file on my phone of all the things that I was learning. And so I opened up that file. I had already been for years alphabetizing it, and I just ended up going, okay, well, I can create the dictionary.
Yeah.
And called it the Narctionary, and that's how it came about.
Wow. I mean, I love, and I've never heard the faux apology before. I love that one. That's a great term, because I definitely got a faux apology from someone. I don't think they're a narcissist, but they definitely were exhibiting narcissistic behavior in our friendship. And I recognized it right away. Luckily at that point, I had disengaged enough to know that what my intuition was telling me was correct. And when the apology came in, I was like, that is not true. Like, I just know this person is just wanting to get us back into the cycle of where like it's comfortable and we can just start the rhythm over again, and
the cycle over again.
Yeah. And I didn't even take the bait. I didn't even answer the apology. I just didn't want it. And sure enough, more things got revealed to me that I was like, wow. And it's it can be really crushing to have these realizations. And at the same time, what a learning lesson. Because once you go through it and you survive it and you come out and you can pinpoint the way you have with this Narctionary book, where you can actually have labels and you can identify certain behaviors and put things to it, that now all of a sudden, like, someone else does it and you instantly have your first clue. Like, exactly what's going on. And one of the things that I realized was from that particular friendship was that I was the one who was always tending to this person's needs, and helping them feel better. And it was a constant roller coaster ride of emotions. And whenever it came to the very odd time where I needed emotional support, they just weren't showing up in the same way, not even close. And the amount of empathy that was being offered to me was so minimal that I had to call it out. And it took me a while to get to the point of calling it out. But when I did, I was met with a monster of a friend
right?
That I
Well,
was like,
because you caused a narcissistic injury.
oh my God, a narcissistic injury. Okay. So, all right. Well, yeah. And that's where the veil was lifted.
Yep.
The rose colored glasses were removed.
Yep.
And I was like, wow, this is not the person I thought I knew.
It's so true. And that's classic narcissistic behavior. You know, I want to touch on a couple of things that you said for the listeners, which is, how do you know if somebody is offering you a true apology or a faux apology?
Okay,
And
this is good. Yes.
yeah, this is really important, especially for women. And I remember being in therapy, and I learned this, and saying that, why is it that their apology doesn't heal my soul? Why? And my therapist said, because it's not an apology, and it's just inflated words. And I'm like, well, how do you know when somebody means the apology? And she gave me such a great example. She said, Tracy, when if a person is a normal human being and not operating in a personality disorder, and we have a misstep in life and we do something that hurts another person, especially if we love that person, we have this feeling inside of us that says, oh my gosh, I hurt another person. And not only did I hurt another person, I hurt a person that I actually care about. And we have like an ache in ourselves that until we go to that person and own our bad and say, you know what, I was having a really off day and I just apologize. That was so wrong of me to do that. And it's because of ABC. And that's not an excuse, but maybe it's an explanation that you can give me a little grace, because this is not in my normal personality to constantly be injuring you in the same place. And it's not going to happen. And then they're clear about what they've done, and that particular wound doesn't happen again. That dynamic doesn't happen again. And with a narcissist, you know, their apologies are, well, I'm sorry that you feel that way. And right.
Oh, that's classic.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That
Sorry
gets
that
me
you feel
going.
that way. But if you wouldn't have done this, then I wouldn't have to be have reacted that way. Well, no, we're kind of all responsible for our own emotions. But I
Mhm.
think that was like a big insight, is that when I find myself in that position, if I am aware and I hurt somebody, I make sure, I'm like, Tracy, are you understanding that you hurt a person that you say that you love? Then own your crap. If you really love this person, you really mean this apology, own your crap and come up with a plan that they can hold on to say that this is how this is never going to happen again. I've learned, and this is what I'm going to do different. And
Yeah.
so when somebody hurts me, I just had a difficult situation with somebody that was in my life for 15 years, worked for my company, and I was seeing things. They knew Tracy, 2.2, and now, like I say, I'm like Tracy 2.15, and they were going back to that original version of me, that they thought that they could get away with things. And the apology that I got was, well, okay, I may have done that, and I'm sorry that you're hurt by that. And you're sorry that I'm hurt by that? What about, I'm sorry I hurt you? What about total ownership? And to me, another thing that I live my life by is, a deal breaker. Loyalty has an expiration date, and there are such things as deal breakers. And I said, you know what? I do not want a friendship like that, and I cannot have somebody like that in my company. And I made the difficult decision just to step back and get to a better place. But
Ownership. So ownership is a big component to a true apology.
yeah, to the authenticity of an apology. And
Mhm.
you'll feel it. When somebody gives you a faux apology or a narcissistic apology, it just doesn't heal you. It just, and the biggest thing about it is, in an authentic apology, there's no love bombing.
Yeah. That's a big one.
Yeah,
That's a
because if
big
it's
one.
attached by love bombing, that's just manipulation again. They're just trying
Mhm.
to to get you away from what happened and buy back into the fantasy of what they have to offer you.
And that's what I noticed in my apology that I received, where I realized this feels like manipulation. That's what it felt like to me. I go, it feels like manipulation and I don't like this. And also I would say that, does the apology match the crime committed, so to
Exactly.
speak, right? Because what was done to me was really intense, but the apology came across as almost flippant. Like, it's no big deal. Don't worry about it. Let's just get back to normal. And I'm like, you have no awareness of what you actually just did.
Exactly. Or even if they do, they don't care.
Yeah.
Because those who operate from a healthy standpoint, again, goes to that point like, oh my gosh, I hurt somebody I love. That's the last thing I want to do. That's not love. And you touched upon something that's really, really important. When you're in a narcissistic relationship, that they will diminish your emotions. And they'll say, oh, come on, stop being so sensitive, or you're too sensitive, or you're overreacting. Well, there is something called reactive anger that they pick and pick and pick and pick and pick and pick at you. And then you go, "Ah," and they go, oh, you're so abusive, right? But our emotions are our internal GPS system. And if something doesn't feel right to you, it's not right for you. And never abandon your feelings. If somebody says to you, and I had somebody, along this journey, that same person said to me, you're just so sensitive. You're being too sensitive about this situation. And I said to them, and since the day you've met me, I'm sensitive. Until the day I die, I'm sensitive. And yes, I'm a sensitive person, and what happened to me hurt me, and I'm not okay with that. Instead of saying like, oh, am I too sensitive? And maybe I should, readjust and rethink about it. No, my feelings are my feelings. My truth is my truth. And especially as women, that our emotions our guidance system. And I know that so many people say, like, how many emotions do we have? Thousands and thousands.
Mm.
Happiness and joy and depression and anxiety and gleefulness and no, we have two. It either feels good or it feels bad. Keep it that simple. And if what a person's doing to you feels bad, trust your gut,
Yeah.
make the decision, and if it feels good, stay on that path.
With this particular friend, there were two incidences. The first one, I let it slide because I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that this was actually happening. And I just thought, maybe I am going crazy. Maybe I am asking for too much, and that's, I think, one of the things is like, the narcissist or the person who's exhibiting those kind of behaviors is going to make you feel like whatever you're asking for or bringing up to be apologized for is like you're asking for too much.
Yes, and that's one of the ways that they control is they use guilt to, and this is why so many people in a narcissistic relationship reach a point that one of my recovery terms is, you will not apologize for taking up your space. You will not apologize for having needs. I'm not saying being needy, because there you need healing. But we all come with a certain set of needs, and we're not supposed to apologize for them.
And that's why the empath is such a great target, because you're always taking care of other people's needs. You're always worried about other people's needs, not your own. And so as I started to do a lot more of my healing and I started to focus on my needs, I started to realize I'm not getting what I need emotionally in support of what I'm going through from someone who's supposed to be a friend to me. And so when I called them out on, and when I called them, when I say I called them out, I mean, I approached this with a lot of trepidation, because I had a feeling that it wasn't like, one, it was very uncomfortable for me to ask for my needs to be met, because I was still going through that healing. But two, I also didn't want to set the person off, right? So there's this fear of not wanting to set them off. And so when I actually did say it, and I said it in what I thought was a very compassionate, vulnerable way, I was met with this exact statement: it is not my job to cater to your ego?
Oh, that's a good one.
Uh,
Okay, let me explain that one. Okay, so narcissists are actually very smart. And yes, we none of us are to have to kit handle somebody else's ego. We are all responsible for our own ego. And where I am in my emotional recovery is I have people that I love dearly and they have narcissism, but it's an open conversation when we're together. And when this person starts to engage in their shenanigans,
mm,
I will look at them and I'll say, listen, you are responsible for your adult emotions. I'm not responsible for your emotions. But that means I'm not in the position, I will not take on the responsibility of processing your emotions. That's what that means.
mm-hmm,
That I'm not responsible for processing your emotions. But that's a very narcissistic, manipulative thing to have, because what's that saying behind it is, how dare you have needs in this relationship? That's what it's really saying.
that is, and that was just like, I never ask for anything, like I'm always the one taking care of you. And in this one moment I'm asking, and it was like one of a very low moment in my, I was in severe pain, going through major heartache. And I was, I'll never forget that statement. It was like it was branded into my mind, because in that moment I felt like I was looking at a complete stranger over FaceTime, and just met with literally ice in their eyes. And I just thought and it made me just shrink. And I'm like, what? I just I just was, took all of the effort to finally go through my healing journey of actually asking for a need to be met that I know is not getting met in this moment. And I'm in dire need of, the thing that you're supposed to be providing me as a friend that I've provided you over and over and over and over and over again. And funnily enough, though, that wasn't where I left, because I was too in shock, like that was that I knew in my heart that something was not right there. But I let it slide because there was a lot of love bombing in that friendship, a lot of love bombing. And because this can happen in like male friendships, it can happen in female friendships. It's not just a male female thing.
Exactly. It can
And
happen in work relationships. It can
yeah,
happen in religious environments. It can happen everywhere.
but the second time around, when I actually went to go ask for something or state that I wasn't happy with something in the relationship, in the friendship, and I got met with the same kind of, well, not I wasn't met with that statement, but it was basically like the person turned themselves into the victim and I was the perpetrator.
That's a good one. Yeah. At the end, that's when I go back to that reactive anger where they poke and poke and poke and poke. And then when you exercise a boundary and stating a need to another person is, hey, if I'm an equal in this relationship, I need this because I'm giving it to you, because part of a healthy relationship is reciprocity. What I put
Mm-hmm.
into you, it's an exchange of energy, that it's never like this. Healthy relationships are this.
Yeah, you
It's
can't just keep debiting from the friendship and think that, everything's going to be fine. There's not going to be
yeah,
much left in that bank account.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's wild. So, Kate, give me a couple of terms from the Narctionary that the audience might have never heard before, but would be really useful for them to know. Uh,
Okay,
yeah.
so let's say that I'm going to use one that will help you identify a narcissist, and it's called Mr. and Mrs. Breathy. And
Breathy.
Mr. and Mrs. Breathy, and it can apply to a male or a female.
Okay.
And when see, narcissists, they can be very passive aggressive,
Mm-hmm.
and the way that they condition you and let you know that you have failed them and will, start a fight over nothing, is they will exercise some form of punishment. Sometimes it's enraging, sometimes uh different forms of punishment. Well, one of the ways that I learned to recognize that I caused a narcissistic injury was that Mr. Breathy would show up. And the way that I knew Mr. Breathy would show up would be, hi, hi, what's wrong? Nothing. And then I would start to tremble. Oh my gosh, I've done something wrong. What did I do wrong? Did I do something wrong? Yeah. And so you get this very breathy, distant, passive aggressive punishment, and it would send me into a cycle. So then I would become afraid. Then I would start, what did I do wrong? I know I did something wrong. Why don't you just tell me? Why don't you just talk to me? And then I'm fuel sourcing, fuel sourcing, fuel sourcing. And then inevitably it would end up in a punishment over something that I did, that I said wrong, that caused a narcissistic injury, and this whole cycle. When I gave Mr. or Ms. Breathy a name, if I would say, hi, hi, my first phase of healing would be like, oh, Mr. Breathy's here, which means he wants to blame, it was a male-female relationship. He wants to blame me for something that I said and did. I caused a narcissistic injury, and I was able to hold on to myself and not go do my side of the cycle of the abuse, right? The enabling, the pawning, etc. As my recovery continued, now when I meet a narcissist in business, in personal life, whatever, and I'm like, hi, how are you? Fine. I'll say, why is Mr. Breathy here? And I just call it out as it is.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? I don't know. You're talking all breathy, and that tells me that something's wrong. So if you have something to say, just use your words and tell me directly what's wrong. So it's a progressive thing. So I like to give name to the behaviors of a narcissist.
Yes, I love that. That because how many? I'm sure so many of my people in my audience have encountered that one several times. I know I have. Yes.
And if you just ask them, why is Mr. Breathy? Or, another good one is narcissists, when they want to show you the disapproval, they'll roll their eyes at you. And these nonverbals are like, you're so stupid, right? They're like, you're so stupid. And in the past, I'd be like, oh my gosh, they think I'm stupid. What did I do that's stupid? And I would go into the self-doubt. And now the way that I handle that, if somebody rolls their eyes, I literally go, what do you keep looking at on the ceiling? And I just call it nothing. Well, why are you rolling your eyes? And so I've learned to just call people out in a little bit of a playing or
that makes them feel ridiculous for what they're doing.
Yeah, and calls them out, because this is what children do. And I want to be in relationships with adults.
Yes.
I don't have the energy I don't want to raise adults. And when a narcissist has their episodes, because they can be benign and okay, and then they go into their episode, I call them, they get episodic, is that it's no different than a 3-year-old having a temper tantrum. And I don't want to raise adults, and that's kind of my boundary with friendships and with love relationships. I will not raise adults. Nobody got to raise me. I didn't have that luxury. I had to raise myself, and I had to work through my own issues. So if I have that boundary, I insisted on other people. A really good word on the other side of that is a word in recovery. And when I learned this word, it was really a big wake-up call. And this one is called poop in your soup. And this one came about that I had the ability to tolerate the intolerable. I could tolerate it for, if most people could hold their breath underwater for 35 seconds, I could be under there for 5 minutes. I could just tolerate the intolerable. And one day the analogy was given to me that narcissistic abuse is like having poop in your soup. And the smallest drop of poop in your soup is never okay. And the moral of that story is even a dab of narcissistic abuse needs to be a non-negotiable. If somebody came up and were to say, hi, I have this wonderful soup for you, and it only has a dollop of poop in it, your response would be like, what is wrong with you? You think I'm crazy that I'm going to consume that? Well, it's no different that I used to consume the poop of a narcissist and wonder why I was sick. And so I remind myself that for emotional, nutritional reasons, I no longer contain poop with soup.
Yeah. Well, thank goodness for that one, because that's not tasty by any means. But it
Exactly.
also speaks to the importance of literally like there's no tolerance anymore. There's zero tolerance.
For me, there's zero tolerance. That
Mhm.
I have somebody in my life who I love dearly. They are a part of my family, and I choose with my eyes wide open to have that person still in my life. So the only ounce of energy I don't get destroyed by the relationship at all anymore is that. But other than that, I don't have the tolerance for narcissistic behavior. I monitor somebody. If they're having a bad day, I can have grace. But if I start to see patterns, and no way. And like you said, that your friend, they did it once. We say, what's going on here? They do it a second time. That's a conscious choice. They do it a third time. They're trying to condition you.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why for me, that's where I had zero tolerance the second time around. And that's why when the faux apology, I should say, came in and there was no response from me, and never was ever again. Like never, ever again. Just
Yeah.
not interested.
Well,
Um,
I would imagine to say if you did respond, it would engage the cycle again because you'd be fueling them, and then they would go and begin all of their same manipulations all over again.
mhm, mhm. And, that's something that a lot of people have to be aware of, especially when you are very empathic, that having strong boundaries is your ultimate weapon. I should say, but it's your shield. It's everything. It's everything. Boundaries are so important because your energy is so filling, like your energy, it tastes good, it feels good. It's like it's one of those like super duper rich feelings that just fill up any kind of narcissistic behavior. And you've got to know how good you are tasting to someone who's very hungry and needs to be fed. And
Exactly.
you got to have those boundaries in place. And so boundary setting and not wavering on those boundaries, no matter, how bad of a person you might feel. I was listening to a podcast today, this morning at the gym. And one of the things that they said was, do you want to be a nice person or a good person? And it's like, being a nice person, you're going to get walked over. You'll always try to accommodate someone else because you just want to be nice. But if you're going to be a good person, you're going to do the right thing. And there's a difference between the two.
And can I add to that? That's a very true statement. And if I can add to that, there are so many empaths, and I'm guilty of this in my past as well, that I thought that by tolerating or sacrificing to the narcissist, that I would somehow be able to lead them to the light of good behavior. But if you really, really, really love this person that's a narcissist that you claim that you love, you will not enable them. And the way that you enable them is to allow them to fuel source off of you, allow them to misbehave and go back for more. That if you really love them and you love yourself, that you will be very clear what the deal breakers are within a relationship. And it's okay to have deal breakers. It's okay if even if you've committed this person to your life, you have the right to change your mind,
Mm-hmm.
because I promise you, who they're presenting to you today is not the person that they presented to you originally.
Yeah.
And so you have the right to say, you know what, you are the one who changed the contract, the emotional contract, not me. You promise love and support and loyalty and all these things, and that's not who you are. And you have every right to say you broke the deal. And so when the reason that there are contracts in place, and all relationships have to have emotional contracts, that we have the right to leave that person to the result of their own choices. And if you really love somebody, you won't try you won't enable them. It's no different than how when an empath allows a narcissist to fuel source off of them, it's no different than the codependent handing an alcoholic a drink.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. And you've got to understand that. You've got to understand what their fix is, because it is an addiction.
It is. It's an addiction on both sides.
Yeah.
You know, in my recovery program, it's called Reclaiming Me, and it's a 1-year recovery program that takes place twice a week. And I have 6 modules in it. The very first module is called "What is this?" And I start really defining like what is narcissism, what is narcissistic abuse trauma, blah, 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 blah. The second module is called "What happened to me?" And I identify like the 13 most common abuses, or I call them shenanigans, that the narcissist does in order to condition you and break you down. The next module is called Love and the Narcissist. And here I dive deep into why is a narcissist attracted to me? And I explain the whole empath narcissist connection, because there's only 2 relationships. It's the narcissist plus the narcissist, and the narcissist and the self-deprecate. And the next one after that is healing from CPTSD, and which is a very specific path that you have to go through. And there's a whole process. And then the next one is, when no contact is not an option, how do we deal with narcissism if we're going to keep them in our life, and then life after narcissism.
Wow, that's powerful. That's powerful. Well, I've really enjoyed having you on the show, Tracy. It's been a pleasure to have you here. I've definitely learned a few things, which I always love, the takeaways. Can please let my audience know where they can reach out to you, find you, and especially where your book is.
Thank you very much. So the book can be found on Amazon.com, and it's spelled just like dictionary, only narctionary. And it has because I say that the world of its own actually has a language of its own. And so I've identified 350 terms and sayings and words associated with narcissism, narcissistic trauma, narcissistic recovery, and narcissistic abuse. And my website is drtracy.tv. And there's where you can also find our recovery program called Reclaiming Me. And anybody who's listening to this, one of the things that we do with the hosts is if you need that recovery, just drop Sue's name in on the box, and we'll have you be our guest at the first class. And after this, the classes are only $10 each. And I do that because I'm just passionate about getting people out of the crazy cycle that took me years and years and years to heal. And I want to get women in and out of it as quickly as possible, back to living.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to leave all of the links for that in the show notes. So if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, just check the show notes. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'll leave in the description below this video. And to my audience, thank you so much for being here tonight and listening in. If you are experiencing some of these patterns in your relationships, you may want to check out the Narctionary just to give you some insight and guidance on how to identify and claim something, because having these sort of situations become more tangible to you, to actually be able to grab onto it, touch it, feel it, know it, is part of your power being restored back to you. So thank you so much. And for anyone out there, remember, I've got the Forbidden Journey Retreat happening this September in Breckenridge, Colorado. There are only 10 spots available, and some have already been taken. So if you're interested in attending the Forbidden Journey Retreat with me, I'd love to have you there. All of the links are in the show notes below. And of course, if you're interested in the group coaching program, that will be starting next month. You still have time to jump in. I love you guys, and I'll see you guys next week. Thanks again for joining me for another show on the Enlighten Up podcast. I love you guys so much for all of your continued support. So remember to raise your vibe, find your tribe, and be open to the infinite possibilities held in the mysteries that surround us all. Thanks again for sharing the show with your family and friends. And if you're new to the show and you need to find out more information about me, please head on over to my website, NicoleFrolick.com, where you can join my newsletter. And please follow me on Instagram, Telegram, and YouTube. Keep your light bright, and I'll see you next week.